What happens when a ruthless Boston crime lord wagers $5 million that he can marry the most invisible, overweight girl in the city? He wins the bet, but he loses his mind when she disappears, only to return entirely unrecognizable and ready to destroy him. Vincent Romano did not play games unless he was guaranteed to win. As the head of the Romano syndicate controlling the ports and underground casinos of Boston, his life was a calculated series of risks and brutal victories. He was 32, built like a heavyweight fighter, and accustomed to a life where women were beautiful, compliant, and temporary accessories. It was a rainy Tuesday night in the VIP lounge of the Obsidian Club when the bet was born. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the clinking of crystal whiskey glasses. Sitting across the velvet-lined poker table was Tristan Harrington, a rival associate with the trust fund, a massive ego, and the habit of running his mouth. "You've got everything, Vince," Tristan slurred slightly, throwing a stack of chips into the center of the table. "Money, territory, any supermodel in the city waiting in your penthouse. But you're predictable. You only go for the plastic perfection. You wouldn't know how to handle a real challenge." Vincent raised an eyebrow, his dark eyes locking onto Tristan's. "I handle challenges every day, Harrington, usually by burying them." Tristan chuckled, leaning forward. "I mean a different kind of challenge. I bet you couldn't get a woman to marry you if she wasn't a gold digger or a model. In fact, I bet you couldn't get her to marry you." Tristan pointed through the frosted glass of the VIP door. Down in the main office of the club, sitting under harsh fluorescent lights, was Luciana Jenkins. Penny was the club's head bookkeeper. She was 26, brilliant with numbers, and unequivocally fat. Weighing over 250 pounds, Penny spent her life trying to be invisible. She hid her soft, round features behind thick-rimmed glasses and buried her body in oversized, shapeless grey cardigans. While the bottle service girls upstairs wore diamonds and silk, Penny smelled of vanilla lotion and the powdered donuts she nervously stress-ate while balancing the syndicate's dirty ledgers. She was sweet, painfully shy, and existed entirely outside of Vincent's violent, glamorous universe. Vincent looked at Penny, then back at Tristan, his expression flat. "You're drunk, Tristan." "I'm serious," Tristan countered, his eyes lighting up with malicious glee. $5 million, cold hard cash. I bet you $5 million that you can't get Luciana to legally marry you within 3 months. And you can't use threats. You have to charm her. You have to make the fat girl fall in love." The table went silent. $5 million was a drop in the bucket for Vincent, but his pride was a different currency altogether. He looked back down at the office. Penny dropped a pen and awkwardly bent over to pick it up, her face flushing red just from the exertion. She was the absolute antithesis of everything Vincent represented. 3 months? Vincent asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. 90 days, Tristan confirmed, extending a hand. To secure a legal marriage certificate. No prenups that give away the game. She has to say, "I do," because she thinks the big, bad mafia boss genuinely loves her. Vincent took Tristan's hand, his grip crushing. "Prepare the $5 million, Tristan. I'll expect it in unmarked hundreds." The very next day, the illusion began. Penny was sitting at her desk engrossed in a complex money laundering spreadsheet when the heavy mahogany door to her office clicked open. She didn't look up, expecting one of the muscle-bound enforcers to drop off a bag of cash. Instead, the distinct scent of expensive Tom Ford cologne and dark roast coffee filled the room. "You look like you've been staring at that screen for hours, Luciana." Penny gasped, nearly knocking over her lukewarm tea. Vincent Romano was standing at her desk. He was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, and he was holding a small, pristine, pink bakery box. "Mr. Romano," she stammered, her cheeks burning with an immediate deep crimson blush. I'm almost done with the offshore accounts. I just need— Relax, Vincent said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He pulled up a chair no one ever sat in and placed the box on her desk. I noticed you usually grab a stale pastry from the break room around this time. I was at North End this morning. Brought you a fresh cannoli. Penny stared at the box as if it were a bomb. Men like Vincent Romano did not bring pastries to girls like her. Men like Vincent barely acknowledged he had a pulse, let alone a name. Tinkyell, she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. That was week 1. By week 3, Vincent had completely dismantled Penny's defenses. He was a master tactician, and he treated the seduction of Luciana Jenkins like a high-stakes turf war. He didn't rush her. He started with small conversations about her life, her love for classic literature, her dreams of opening her own accounting firm. He listened intently, making her feel like the only person in the room. Then came the dinners. Because Penny was deeply insecure about eating in public, Vincent rented out entire restaurants. Just the two of them sitting under crystal chandeliers, eating rich Italian food while a private string quartet played in the background. "Why me, Vincent?" she asked one night, her eyes welling up with tears. She was wearing a custom-made navy dress he had ordered for her, though it still clung to her heavy frame in ways that made her want to hide. "Look at you, and look at me. I'm fat. I'm boring. I don't fit in your world." Vincent reached across the table, taking her soft, trembling hands in his rough, calloused ones. He looked deeply into her eyes, forcing the perfect lie past his lips. "I am surrounded by fake people, Tenny. Women who only want my power. Men who only want my money. You are the most real, genuine, beautiful soul I have ever met. I don't care about the rest." Penny broke down crying. For the first time in her life, she felt beautiful. She felt loved. 58 days into the bet, on the balcony of his penthouse overlooking the Boston skyline, Vincent Romano got down on one knee and handed Luciana Jenkins a 4-carat diamond ring. She sobbed so hard she could barely breathe, but her answer was a resounding, joyous yes. The wedding was a quiet, private affair, held at Vincent's sprawling estate in the Hamptons. Luciana wore a custom white gown. It had taken a team of tailors a week to craft it to her measurements, and while she still felt self-conscious about her thick arms and wide waist, the sheer joy radiating from her face made her glow. She stood at the altar looking at Vincent, reciting her vows with a trembling, emotion-filled voice. Vincent smiled warmly, played the part perfectly, and kissed his new bride as the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. 82 days. Vincent had won the bet with a week to spare. The reception was small, limited to Vincent's inner circle of capos and associates. Penny sat at the head table, her hand resting over Vincent's, feeling like she was living inside a fairy tale. She had noticed Tristan Harrington sitting at a corner table, nursing a scotch with a dark, sour expression on his face, but she didn't care. She was Mrs. Vincent Romano. However, as the evening wore on, the fairy tale began to crack. Vincent, who had spent the last 2.5 months practically glued to her side, suddenly seemed distant. The warm, affectionate touches stopped the moment the cameras were put away. He spent most of the reception drinking with his lieutenants, leaving Penny to awkwardly smile at the wives of other mobsters women, who were rail-thin, Botoxed, and looking at Penny with thinly veiled disgust. Around midnight, Penny went upstairs to the master suite to change out of her heavy wedding dress. She was exhausted but blissfully happy, eager for her husband to join her. As she struggled with the laces at the back of her gown, she realized she needed help. She threw a silk robe over her shoulders and padded softly barefoot down the carpeted hallway toward Vincent's private study, where she knew he had gone for a meeting. As she approached the heavy oak door, She realized it was slightly ajar. She raised her hand to push it open, but the sound of Tristan Harrington's voice stopped her dead in her tracks. "I have to hand it to you, Vince," Tristan was saying, his voice dripping with venomous respect. "I didn't think you had the stomach for it. I really didn't. When you kissed that fat cow at the altar, I nearly lost my lunch." Penny's breath caught in her throat. The blood drained from her face, leaving her entirely numb. A heavy thud echoed from the room. It was the sound of a briefcase hitting the wooden desk. "Count it," Vincent's voice replied. It wasn't the warm, gentle tone he had used with Penny for the last 80 days. It was his business voice, cold, flat, and devoid of any human emotion. $5 million, just like we agreed. "Oh, I trust you, Vince," Tristan laughed. "But seriously, what's the play now? You're legally shackled to Shamu. How long before you dump her?" Penny leaned against the wall, clamping a hand over her mouth to muffle the desperate, tearing sob that was clawing its way up her throat. Her heart wasn't just breaking. It was being pulverized. "She's quiet. She's obedient, and she handles the books well," Vincent replied, the clinking of ice and a glass echoing through the crack in the door. "I'll stick her in the summer house in Maine. Tell her it's for her own safety because of the syndicate business. In a year, I'll file for a quiet divorce, give her a modest settlement to keep her mouth shut, and be done with it." It was an easy $5 million, Tristan. Easiest money I ever made. "You're a monster, Romano," Tristan chuckled. "I'm a businessman," Vincent corrected smoothly. "Now get out of my house." Penny didn't wait to hear another word. She turned and sprinted back down the hallway, the heavy silk of her robe trailing behind her. She slammed the door to the master suite and locked it, collapsing onto the plush, king-sized bed. She didn't scream. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it stole her voice. She dragged herself into the adjoining master bathroom and stared at herself in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. She looked at her tear-streaked face, her double chin, her wide hips, and the heavy rolls of flesh that she had spent her entire life hating. "He never loved you," her reflection screamed at her. "How could you be so stupid? How could you ever believe a man like him could look at a body like this and feel anything but disgust?" She ripped the 4-carat diamond ring off her finger. It cut into her skin, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony in her chest. She threw the ring as hard as she could. It shattered the glass of a framed painting on the wall. For an hour, Luciana Jenkins sat on the bathroom floor and cried until she had nothing left. She mourned the death of the girl who believed in fairy tales. And then slowly the devastating sorrow began to curdle into something else. Rage. Penny stood up. She wiped her face with a cold washcloth. She wasn't just a fat, naive girl. She was the head bookkeeper for the Romano syndicate. She knew where every single dime of Vincent's legitimate and illegitimate money was hidden. She knew the offshore account numbers. She knew the passcodes. Vincent thought she was a quiet, obedient cow he could lock away in a summer house. He had vastly underestimated her. She moved quickly. She stripped off the white wedding gown, leaving it in a crumpled, pathetic heap on the floor. She dressed in her darkest, most unremarkable clothes: black leggings, a loose black sweater, a dark beanie. She grabbed a duffel bag from the closet. Penny bypassed the front of the house and slipped down into Vincent's private basement office. She punched in the code to his floor, safe, a code he had trusted her with to deposit the week's skimming. Inside were stacks of emergency cash, bearer bonds, and a collection of untraceable passports he kept for worst-case scenarios. She packed a duffel bag with exactly $5 million in cash and bearer bonds. Not a penny more, not a penny less. Before she left the office, she took a piece of Vincent's monogrammed stationery and wrote a single pristine sentence in her flawless handwriting. She left the note on his desk, right on top of his favorite humidor. "You won the bet, Vincent. I'm taking my cut." By the time Vincent Romano finally came upstairs to the master bedroom to check on his bride, the sun was beginning to rise. He found the shredded wedding dress, the broken painting, and an empty suite. And by the time his enforcers found the note in the basement, Luciana Romano had vanished like a ghost in the wind. Luciana did not run to a five-star hotel in Paris, nor did she bury herself in a quiet suburban town. She knew how men like Vincent Romano operated. They owned the cities, the police, and the cameras. To disappear from a mafia don, she had to drop completely off the grid. She drove for 3 days straight, trading cars twice through cash purchases, until she reached the bitter, sweeping wilderness of Montana. Deep in the Bitterroot Mountains, miles away from the nearest paved road, was a heavily fortified, off-grid subterranean compound. It was built to withstand Category 5 storms and worse, engineered by her estranged uncle, Jericho. Jericho was a former Navy SEAL, a ghost of a man who had spent his life surviving war zones and now preferred the company of timber wolves to politicians. When Luciana arrived at his reinforced steel gates, exhausted, heartbroken, and carrying a duffel bag filled with $5 million in stolen syndicate cash, Jericho didn't ask questions. He took her in. "I need to disappear," Penny told him that first night, sitting by a wood-burning stove as the mountain wind howled outside. "And then I need to become someone else, someone he can't break." Jericho looked at the tears staining her cheeks and the soft, trembling hands that had only ever held ledgers. He nodded once. "The tears stop tonight, kid. Tomorrow, the fire starts." The metamorphosis of Luciana Jenkins was not a glamorous montage. It was 2 years of brutal, unrelenting agony. Jericho treated her like a raw recruit. Every morning began at 4 a.m. with grueling physical conditioning in the thin mountain air. At first, Penny could barely run a quarter-mile without collapsing, her heavy frame rebelling against the strain. She threw up, she cried, she begged to stop, but the memory of Vincent's cold laughter and Tristan's cruel bet echoed in her mind, fueling a dark, burning rage inside her chest. She learned to fight. Jericho taught her close-quarters combat, how to disarm an opponent twice her size, and how to shoot with lethal precision. The soft, invisible bookkeeper was systematically destroyed, burned away by sweat, discipline, and sheer willpower. As the months bled into years, the physical weight melted off her frame, replaced by lean, corded muscle. Her round, soft features sharpened into striking high cheekboned angles. She stopped hiding behind oversized cardigans and thick glasses, eventually undergoing LASIK surgery in a private clinic in Calgary. But the physical transformation was only half the battle. Penny was a financial genius, and she knew that to destroy a man like Vincent Romano, breaking his jaw wasn't enough. She had to break his empire. Using the off-grid satellite uplink in Jericho's bunker, she went to work. The $5 million was her seed money. She funneled it through a labyrinth of Delaware LLCs and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Zurich. She exploited her intimate knowledge of Vincent's operations. She knew his suppliers, his shipping routes, and the exact margins of his illegal gambling rings. Operating under the pseudonym The Architect, Luciana began a shadow war. She hired elite corporate mercenaries and rogue data brokers. When Vincent expected a shipment of illicit goods at the Boston ports, Penny anonymously tipped off federal agents, costing him millions. When Vincent attempted to launder money through real estate in Manhattan, Penny's shell companies outbid him at the last second, strangling his cash flow. Panic began to spread through the Romano syndicate. They were hemorrhaging money, and Vincent was losing control. His capos were growing restless, whispering that the boss had lost his edge. Vincent became paranoid, lashing out at his own men, entirely unaware that the architect of his destruction was the woman he had discarded like trash. By the end of the second year, Luciana was ready. She was 28 years old, unrecognizable and lethal. She wasn't just a survivor, she was an apex predator, and it was time to return to Boston. The atmosphere inside the VIP room of the Azure Casino was suffocatingly tense. Vincent Romano sat at the head of a long mahogany table, looking 5 years older than he had on his wedding day. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, and his trademark tailored suits hung a little looser on his frame. His empire was on the brink of total collapse. The architect had systematically dismantled his supply chains, bought out his most lucrative politicians, and acquired the debts of his top lieutenants. Vincent was cornered, forced to request a parley to negotiate a truce before his own men turned on him. Standing nervously near the door was Tristan Harrington. Tristan had lost his trust fund to a series of disastrous stock shorts, orchestrated invisibly by Penny, and was now relying on Vincent for protection from his own creditors. "They're late," Vincent snapped, checking his Rolex. "The architect plays by their own rules, boss," one of his enforcers muttered, eyeing the door. At exactly midnight, the heavy double doors swung open. 2 heavily armed private security contractors stepped into the room, scanning the corners. Then the architect walked in. Vincent stopped breathing. The woman who entered the room was a vision of terrifying, absolute power. She wore a sharp, blood-red Alexander McQueen suit that perfectly tailored her athletic, hourglass figure. Her dark hair was slicked back into a sharp, elegant style, and her eyes cold, calculating, and piercing locked directly onto Vincent. She moved with the predatory grace of someone who owned the room, the building, and everyone inside it. She didn't look like an underground boss. She looked like a billionaire CEO who could order a hit over her morning coffee. "Mr. Romano," she said, her voice smooth, deep, and devoid of any fear. She walked to the opposite end of the table and sat down, crossing her long legs. Vincent stared at her, a strange, terrifying sense of déjà vu washing over him. There was something in the eyes, something in the exact tilt of her chin, but his brain couldn't reconcile the magnificent, dangerous woman sitting in front of him with anyone he knew. "You're the architect," Vincent said, his voice raspy. "I expected a ma'am." "Men often expect many things they don't get, Vincent," she replied smoothly. She snapped her fingers, and one of her guards placed a thick, leather-bound folder on the table, sliding it across the polished wood until it stopped right in front of him. "Open it." Vincent frowned, pulling the folder open. Inside were transfer deeds, banking codes, and contracts. "What is this?" Vincent demanded. "That is your life," she stated flatly. "Those are the deeds to your waterfront properties, which I now own. Those are the routing numbers to your offshore accounts, which I have frozen. And on the last page is a list of your top 6 capos, all of whom are now on my payroll." Vincent's face went entirely pale. He flipped to the last page, seeing the signatures of his most trusted men. He looked up, a mixture of rage and sheer panic twisting his features. "Who the hell are you? What do you want?" Luciana leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. A slow, chilling smile spread across her red lips. "I already took what I wanted, Vincent. Exactly 2 years, 4 months, and 12 days ago. From the floor safe in your basement, the room went deathly quiet. Tristan Harrington, standing by the wall, suddenly let out a strangled gasp, dropping his whiskey glass. It shattered against the marble floor. "No," Tristan whispered, his eyes wide with horror as he stared at her. "No, it's impossible." Vincent's mind raced, struggling to connect the impossible dots. The basement, safe, the missing 5 million, the note left on the humidor. He stared into the eyes of the ruthless, beautiful woman across from him, and finally, the illusion shattered. "Penny?" Vincent breathed out, the name sounding foreign on his lips. His heart slammed against his ribs. The fat, invisible, trembling bookkeeper. The girl he had married for a joke. She was entirely gone. In her place sat a queen who held his head on a chopping block. Luciana Romano, actually, she corrected, tilting her head. We never did finalize that quiet divorce you planned, did we, darling? Which makes everything yours, legally half mine, and the other half. I just bought it. Vincent sprang to his feet, knocking his chair backward. You bitch, he roared, reaching for the weapon inside his jacket. Before his hand even cleared his lapel, Penny drew a sleek, suppressed tactical pistol from her waistband and leveled it perfectly between his eyes. She didn't flinch. Her hand was as steady as a stone. Sit down, Vincent, she commanded, the authority in her voice vibrating through the room. His enforcers didn't move to help him. They already knew who signed their checks now. Slowly, trembling with a mixture of awe and absolute terror, Vincent raised his hands and sank back into his chair. He was ruined. The realization crashed down on him like an anvil. The ultimate status reversal. He had thought he was the master of the game, but he was nothing but a pawn on her board. You bet $5 million that you could make me fall in love with you, Penny said, her voice ringing with finality. You won the bet, but I used your money to buy your city. I own the ports, I own the clubs, and as of tonight, I own you. She stood up, buttoning her red jacket with a single elegant motion. She looked down at him with the exact same cold, flat expression he had used the night he destroyed her heart. You're going to pack a bag, Vincent, Luciana ordered, turning her back on him to walk toward the doors. I hear the summer house in Maine is lovely this time of year. Consider it an early retirement. If you ever show your face in Boston again, I won't just freeze your accounts. I'll bury you. She paused at the door, glancing over her shoulder at a trembling, sweating Tristan Harrington. And Tristan, you owe me $3 million for the debts I bought from your creditors. You have 30 days to pay me back, or my men will collect it in pounds of flesh. Goodbye, gentlemen. Luciana walked out of the casino and into the cool, crisp Boston night. She breathed in the air, tasting the absolute sweetness of victory. The invisible girl was dead. The architect had arrived, and her reign had only just begun. What an absolute masterpiece of revenge! Penny completely flipped the script, transforming from an underestimated target into the undisputed queen of the underworld. If you loved this insane glow-up and the ultimate instant karma served to Vincent and Tristan,